My name is Veshtol, and I have spent 40 of your years as a reader of the kneeling court on Ashkari Deep. I have watched 10,000 debtors bare their throats. I thought I understood what shame was for. I was wrong, and it took a human to teach me, and I have not been able to look at my own hands the same way since. Let me start with the station, because you should see it the way I saw it that morning. Ashkari Deep is not a planet. It is a ring of black stone and colder metal, wrapped around a dead star that gives no warmth, only a thin blue light that falls on everything like frost that never melts. We built it there on purpose. My people, the Dre, believe that judgment should happen far from anything living, so that nothing green or breathing can distract the mind from the weight of the law. There are no gardens on Ashkari Deep. There is only the court, the docks, the long gray corridors, and the sound. The sound is the thing outsiders never forget. It is a low hum that comes up through the floor from the machines that keep the star's remains from collapsing, and after a while you stop hearing it with your ears and start feeling it in your teeth. Newcomers press their hands to the walls without meaning to. They think the station is about to break. It is not. That hum has run for 600 years. It will outlive all of us. That morning the docks were crowded. A grain hauler had come in from the outer belts, and its crew filled the receiving hall with their noise and their smell of engine grease and dried fruit. There were Dre officials in their gray robes, tall and thin, moving through the crowd the way we always move, like we are apologizing for taking up space. There were a few off-world traders, and there was the human ship. I want to be honest with you. When I first heard a human vessel had docked, I did not think much of it. Humans were still new to our part of the dark then. We had heard the stories the way you hear stories about a distant war, that they were stubborn, that they fought when it made no sense to fight, that they made promises to strangers and then kept them, which struck us as almost insane. But stories are cheap. I had a full docket. I did not have time for legends. The human ship was small, a survey vessel patched in 3 places, with a name painted on its side in a language I could not read. Later I learned it said Kestrel, 6 crew, and among them the woman. I did not know her name yet. I only saw her from across the hall, and what I noticed first was that she did not press her hand to the wall. Everyone presses their hand to the wall. She just stood there in the hum with her feet apart like she was on the deck of a ship in rough water, and she listened to it. And then she nodded once, like the station had told her something and she had agreed with it. Her name, I would learn, was Captain Ada Reyes. The trouble started at the customs table, which is where trouble on Ashkari Deep always starts. You have to understand how our law works, because if you do not understand it, you will not understand what she did, or why it broke something open in me that has stayed broken in a good way ever since. The Dre do not punish crime with pain or with prison or with death, except in the rarest cases. We punish with kneeling. This is the center of everything we believe. When a person wrongs another under our law, when they break a contract or damage property or fail a duty, the law does not ask for their blood. It asks for their posture. The guilty party must kneel in the kneeling court, before the one they wronged, before the readers, before whoever happens to be in the hall, and they must lower their throat, and they must speak the words of the dead aloud, and they must let themselves be seen in their failure. We believed this was mercy. I still believed it that morning. We told ourselves that a body left whole is a gift, and that shame heals where a wound only scars. And for us it was true. For a Dre, to kneel and be witnessed is painful but clean. We are built for it. Our necks are long and they bend easily, and our whole culture has taught us since we could walk that the throat offered is the throat forgiven. But the law did not only apply to us. That was the flaw, and no one had ever forced us to look at it. The law of Ashkari Deep applied to anyone who docked there, anyone who did business, anyone who signed a manifest, anyone who entered a contract in our waters. And the law did not care whether your species could bear its shape. The law only cared that it be obeyed. Here is what happened at the customs table. The grain hauler's captain, a heavy-jawed man from the outer belts named Corvus, had a dispute with the human crew. It was a small thing. A shipping crate. I have read the manifest 100 times since. A single crate of medical supplies that both ships had claimed under a salvage clause. The Kestrel had pulled it from a derelict 3 months before. Corvus claimed it had been logged to his line first. Under our law, a contested salvage that enters our docks must be adjudicated before either party can leave. Ordinarily, this is nothing. A reader hears both sides, assigns the goods, and the losing party kneels a brief kneeling to acknowledge the error, and everyone goes home. I have adjudicated 1,000 salvage disputes. I could do it in my sleep. But Corvus was clever, and Corvus was cruel, and Corvus knew something about our law that the humans did not. He did not simply contest the salvage. He accused Captain Reyes of false witness, of knowingly logging goods she knew to be his. This is a heavier charge, and under the old statutes, a false witness who is found guilty does not perform a brief kneeling. She performs the full abasement. I felt my stomach turn when the charge was filed. I remember it. I was assigned the case, and I saw the words on the docket, and something in me already knew this was going to be ugly, though I did not yet know how ugly, or how it would change me. The full abasement is the oldest and heaviest of our rights. It is reserved for those who lie under the eyes of the court, because to the Dre a lie in the court is the deepest wound one person can do to another, worse than theft, worse than violence, because it poisons the one thing that lets a society of strangers trust each other at all. The guilty must kneel not for a moment, but for a full turning of the station's clock. They must remain with throat bared while the hall passes through. They must speak the confession not once, but each time a witness demands it. And this is the part that matters: they must be marked. A reader draws the gray line across the offender's bared throat with ash, the line that says this one lied and was seen, and they must wear it until it fades on its own. For a Dre, this is bearable, terrible but bearable. We are made for the kneel. For a human, I did not know what it would be, and I am ashamed now to tell you that on that morning, I did not think to ask. The hearing was set for the same day. Our law moves quickly. We believe delay is its own cruelty. The kneeling court filled. Word had gone around the docks the way word does, and the grain crew came to watch, and the traders came, and my fellow readers took their high seats in their gray robes, and I sat at the readers' table with the ash pot beside my hand, and I did not yet feel the weight of that pot the way I would feel it before the day was done. Captain Reyes was brought in. She was not tall for a human, I think, though I had little to compare her to. Dark hair pulled back hard from her face, a scar through one eyebrow. She wore her ship's jacket even though she must have been told to remove it, and no one had made her, because there is a way some people hold themselves that makes officials decide the rule can wait. She walked into the center of the court, and she looked at the high seats, and she looked at the ash pot by my hand. She knew what it was for. Someone had told her, and she did not look afraid. That was the first thing that unsettled me. She should have looked afraid. Corvus made his case. He was good at it. He had forged a timestamp. We would not learn this until much later, and he presented it with the confidence of a man who has told the lie so many times he has half convinced himself. He described how the honest human captain had, he claimed, knowingly stolen from his line. He asked the court for the full abasement. He asked for it with his eyes lowered in false sorrow, as though it grieved him. Then it was her turn to answer. Now here is where every other defendant I had ever seen would have done one of two things. They would have denied the charge and fought it, or they would have accepted a lesser guilt to avoid the worst. Reyes did neither. She said, "The crate isn't mine. He's right about that part." The hall went quiet. I looked up from my table. "We pulled it from the derelict." She went on, and her voice was steady and low, and it carried in that terrible acoustic hum without her seeming to raise it. "I logged it under salvage because I believed it was ownerless. If it was logged to his line first, then the crate is his and he can have it. I'm not going to fight over a crate." She paused. "But I didn't lie. I didn't know it was his. and I'm not going to stand here and say I knew just because it would make this go faster. I remember thinking, she does not understand what she is doing. She is admitting the crate is his, which under Corvus's framing makes her look guilty of the false witness, and she is refusing the one exit that might spare her. I thought she was making a fatal mistake out of ignorance. I know now she understood perfectly. She had simply decided that there was one thing she would not do, which was lie about herself in a room full of strangers to make her own suffering shorter. She would give up the crate. She would give up the argument. She would not give up the truth of what was in her own head. That distinction meant nothing to Corvus, and it meant nothing, I am sorry to say, to the letter of our law. Under the statutes as they were written, her admission that the crate was his combined with her salvage log was enough. She had logged goods that turned out to belong to another and had sworn to the log. The forged timestamp did the rest. 2 of the 3 high readers voted to find the false witness proven. The 3rd abstained. That was enough. I was the assigned reader. It fell to me to pronounce the sentence and to perform the rite. I stood. My legs did not feel like mine. I read the finding aloud, the way I had read 1,000 findings, and I heard my own voice say the words full abasement, and for the first time in 40 years those words sounded strange to me, like a word you repeat until it stops meaning anything. Reyes listened. When I finished, she said, "What does that involve? Nobody's actually told me." And I realized, standing there with the whole court watching, that no one had. We had all assumed she knew, or assumed it did not matter that she didn't. I had to explain it to her, out loud, in front of everyone. I told her she would kneel for a full turning of the clock. I told her she would bare her throat. I told her she would speak the confession whenever a witness asked it of her. And I told her, and this is the part where my own voice caught, though I did not understand yet why, that I would mark her throat with ash, and she would wear the mark until it faded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question that I have thought about every day since. She said, "In your people, when you kneel like that, does it mean you did wrong? Or does it just mean you lost?" I did not know how to answer, because the honest answer, the one I had never once said aloud in 40 years, was that I did not entirely know any more. The right was supposed to mean I did wrong and I am seen. But somewhere across 600 years and 10,000 debtors, it had also come to mean I was on the weaker side of the law, and those are not the same thing, and I had spent my whole life pretending they were. I did not answer her. I said the law did not require me to answer, which was true and which was a coward's true. They brought her to the center of the court, to the worn stone where the guilty kneel, where the stone is polished smooth and pale from 600 years of throats offered up. The witnesses arranged themselves. Corvus took a place near the front, and I saw the small satisfaction in his heavy face, and I hated him, and I told myself a reader does not hate, which is another lie I had been telling for 40 years. Captain Reyes knelt. She did it without being pushed. She lowered herself onto the pale stone, and she was still for a moment, and then she lifted her chin and she bared her throat the way I had told her to, and I saw her do the thing that I will remember when everything else about my life has gone dark. I saw her hands. They were flat on her thighs, and they were trembling not from fear, I understood later, but from the sheer animal effort of a creature forcing its own body into a shape that every instinct it owned was screaming at it not to take. A human, I would learn, does not bare its throat to be forgiven. A human bares its throat only to a knife. Everything in her body knew that. And she did it anyway because she had decided the alternative, the lie, was worse. I picked up the ash pot. My hand was not steady. I crossed the court to her, and I knelt in front of her the way the rite requires, so that I could draw the line, and I was close enough to see her face. And this is where it happened. This is where the day turned, and I turned with it. Because from among the witnesses, one of her own crew stepped forward. He was a young man. I did not know his name then. It was Tomas, the Kestrel's engineer, hardly more than a boy. And I braced myself because when a witness steps forward during the abasement, it is almost always to demand the confession, to make the guilty speak their shame again. And I did not want to hear this woman forced to say it twice. But that is not what he did. He crossed the open floor of the kneeling court, and every dray in that hall stiffened, because no one who is not a reader is permitted on that stone, and he walked to where his captain knelt on the pale, worn rock with her throat bared and my ash pot in my trembling hand. And he knelt down beside her. He faced the same way she faced. He lowered himself onto the stone next to her, shoulder almost touching her shoulder, and he lifted his own chin, and he bared his own throat. The hall made a sound I had never heard in 40 years in that court, a kind of collective indrawn breath. I stared at him. I said, and my voice was not a reader's voice anymore, it was just a person's. I said, "You are not sentenced. You did nothing. You cannot kneel. The right is for the guilty." And the boy looked at me. He was frightened. I could see he was frightened. His throat was bared, and everything in him hated it as much as hers hated it. And he looked at me and he said, "Then mark me too." I did not move. "She didn't lie," he said. "You all know she didn't. I was on the derelict. I logged the crate. If anyone was wrong, it was me, and I'll kneel for that. But she's not kneeling because she's guilty. She's kneeling because your law can't tell the difference between losing and lying." He swallowed, and his bared throat moved, and it clearly cost him. "So if she has to wear your mark, put it on me too, because I'm not going to sit in that crowd and watch and pretend this is justice." And then a second crew member stepped onto the stone. And a third. The whole crew of the Kestrel, all 5 of the others, walked out onto the forbidden pale rock of the kneeling court, and one by one they lowered themselves down beside their captain, and one by one they lifted their chins and bared their throats, these creatures for whom the bared throat means only the knife, and they knelt in a line beside a woman the law had called a liar, and they waited for me to mark them. I knelt there in front of them with the ash pot in my hand, and I could not draw the line. I want to tell you what was happening in me, though I am not sure I have the words even now. For 40 years I had believed the kneel was mercy. I had believed that to be witnessed in your failure was a clean pain, a healing pain, and I had watched 10,000 debtors kneel alone. That was the whole point. I had thought that you kneel alone, that the whole weight of the court's eyes falls on you and no one else, that the loneliness of it is what burns the wrong away. But here was a woman kneeling, and she was not alone. Her people had refused to let her be alone. They had taken the shape of shame onto their own bodies, the worst shape their bodies knew, the throat offered to the knife, not because they were guilty, but because she was theirs, and because they had decided that a law that could not tell the difference between a lie and a loss did not get to decide, by itself, who among them would bear a mark. And I understood, kneeling there, that in 40 years I had never once seen anyone do that. Not a dray. Never. Because to us the kneel was solitary by its nature. We had built our whole justice on the idea that shame is a thing you carry by yourself. It had never occurred to us, it had never occurred to me, that shame could be shared, and that in the sharing it might turn into something else entirely. Something that was not shame at all. Corvus saw the hall turning. He was not a fool. He stepped forward and he said loudly that this was a mockery of the court, that the humans were making theater of the law, that the readers must restore order and complete the right. And he was right that the law was on his side. That is the thing I have to make you understand. Nothing the humans did changed one word of the statute. By the letter, Captain Reyes was still the guilty party, and the extra kneelers had no standing, and I was still required to draw the gray line across her throat and hers alone. I looked up at the high readers. I looked at their gray robes and their long bent necks and their old, old faces, the faces of people who had administered this law for so long they had forgotten to ask what it was for. And I looked back down at the line of humans on the stone, throats bared, hands trembling, refusing to let their captain be marked alone. And I made the choice that ended my career and began the only part of my life I am not ashamed of. I set the ash pot down on the stone. I did not draw the line. I stood up, and it is not permitted for a reader to rise before the rite is complete. And I turned to face the high seats, and I said, in the terrible carrying quiet of that hum-filled hall, I withdraw the mark. You could have heard a pin fall 600 years down through that station. The rite, I said, and my voice was shaking, exists to make the guilty visible. That is its only purpose. It was never meant to make the losing visible. And I have watched, just now, 6 people take the shape of guilt onto their own bodies without any guilt in them at all. And if the shape of our deepest shame can be worn by the innocent as an act of love, then the shape means nothing. It has meant nothing for a long time. We just never had anyone brave enough or foreign enough to show us. I turned to Captain Reyes, still kneeling, still with her throat bared because no one had told her she could stop. Get up, I said, please get up. And that is where I have to leave you for now, with a Dre reader standing on the forbidden stone with an ash pot at his feet and 40 years of certainty cracking apart under his ribs, and a human woman lifting her chin to look at him with an expression I did not have a name for, and 5 of her crew kneeling beside her in a rite that had, in the space of a single breath, stopped meaning what it had meant for 600 years. Because it was not over. Corvus was not finished. The high readers were not going to let a junior reader unmake the oldest law of Ashkari Deep with a few brave words. And there was still the matter of the forged timestamp and what it would cost and who it would cost it from. But before any of that, before the fight over what the law was, there was one more thing that happened on that stone in that moment. And it was the smallest thing, and it is the thing I remember most. Captain Ada Reyes stood up, slowly. Her knees did not want to work, she had knelt a long time. And when she was on her feet, she reached down without a word and she picked up my ash pot from the stone where I had set it. And she held it out to me, not throwing it, not refusing it, just handing it back to the person it belonged to carefully, the way you hand someone back a thing they dropped. You keep this, she said quietly, so only I could hear. You're going to need it for the ones who actually lie. And she nodded at Corvus. I have told you how it began. Now I have to tell you how it nearly ended in a way far worse than a marked throat, and how the human woman stood between all of us and that ending without ever raising her voice. I still do not fully understand her, but I have stopped trying to. Some things you are not meant to solve. You are only meant to be changed by them. Let me take you back to that stone. I was standing where a reader is never supposed to stand, on my feet before the rite was done, the ash pot at the human's knees, my own words still hanging in the hum. I withdraw the mark. You have to understand what those words were in that room. They were not a small thing. It was as if one of your own judges had stood in the highest court of your oldest nation and said the law itself was a lie. There is no forgiveness written for that. There is not even a punishment written for it, because in 600 years no reader had ever done it, and so no one had ever thought to write down what should happen to him. The 3 high readers sat very still. On Ashkari Deep, stillness is not calm. Stillness is the Dre gathering themselves before something breaks. The eldest of them was called Ordris Vane. She was older than the station's paint. Her neck had bent so many thousand times in the rites that it no longer straightened all the way, and she carried her head at a permanent slight bow, as though the law had folded her over the years into a living question mark. When she spoke, the whole hall leaned toward her without meaning to. "Reader Veshtol," she said, "you have set down the ash." "I have." "You understand that the finding stands. 2 of 3. The false witness is proven under the statute. Your feelings about the shape of the rite do not unmake a lawful finding." And here is the thing, she was right. That was the trap of it. I had made a beautiful speech about the meaning of the mark, and none of it touched the actual machinery of the law. Reyes was still, on paper, guilty. Corvus's forged timestamp still sat in the record, clean and unchallenged. My refusing to draw the line did not free her. It only meant another reader would be called to draw it, and I would be removed, and the humans would kneel anyway. And the only thing that would have changed was that one reader had made a scene before the inevitable. I felt that trap close. I had spent my whole life inside this law. I knew exactly how it worked, and I knew it was about to work on Reyes no matter what I felt. And then Captain Reyes spoke, and she did the thing that no Dre in that room, including me, had thought to do. She did not argue about the shape of the mark. She did not argue about mercy. She had heard Ordris Vane say lawful finding, and instead of fighting the right, she reached straight past all of it and put her hand on the one thing everyone had forgotten to look at. The findings built on his timestamp, she said. That's the whole case. His log says the crate was on his manifest before we ever reached the derelict. She turned slowly to face Corvus. So let's look at it, right now, in front of everyone. Pull the raw log, not his copy, the station's copy, the one that gets written when a manifest is filed and can't be edited after. If his timestamp is real, it'll match the station record to the second. If it doesn't match, then there's your liar and it isn't me. I want you to understand what a strange and human thing that was to say. To a Dre, the law is a shape you submit to. You lose, you kneel, you bare your throat, and the wrongness flows out of you, and the community is healed, and everyone goes home. We do not, as a rule, interrogate the record in open court. It would be like, I am reaching for a way to say this, it would be like questioning whether the sun should rise. The finding is the finding. The kneel is the kneel. To go back behind the finding and pull the raw log and check a forger's work against the unforgeable copy was not something our law forbade. It was something our law had simply never imagined anyone would want to do, because we had built the whole thing on the assumption that people submit. Reyes did not submit. She had knelt, she had put her body through the worst shape it knew, but she had never for one moment agreed that the finding was true. And now she was asking the court to do the one thing it had the power to do and had forgotten it could. Check. Corvus laughed. It was a bad sound. The station record will match my log. Of course it will match my log. This is a delaying tactic from a convicted liar. Then it costs you nothing to pull it, Reyes said. If it matches, I kneel the full turning and I wear your mark and I never say another word. You have my word on that and I keep my word. Ask anyone who's ever sailed with me. She held his eyes. Pull the log, Corvus. And the whole crowded hall of grain crew and traders and gray-robed officials, turned as one to look at Corvus. Because now the only person in the room refusing to look at the evidence was him. That is a thing about being witnessed that we Dre had forgotten in our long love of the solitary kneel. We had always aimed the eyes of the court at the guilty. We had never thought about what it does to a guilty man to have the eyes turn, all at once, toward him, when he is the one saying, "Don't look." Ordris Vane lifted her bowed head as far as it would go. The station record cannot be altered after filing, she said slowly, as if remembering it herself. This is true. It is written into the docs, not the ledger. No one has asked for it in. She paused. I do not know how long. Perhaps no one has ever asked for it. She looked at Corvus, and Corvus, who had been so smooth, so sorrowful, so confident, made the one mistake a liar makes at the end. He hesitated. It was only a heartbeat, but every creature in that hall saw it. Pull the record, Ordris Vane said. The clerks pulled it. It takes a few moments. The station's true log lives deep in the machines that make the hum, and it has to be drawn up by hand through 6 protocols so that no one can tamper on the way. We all stood there. Reyes stood with her chin up and her crew still half kneeling on the stone behind her, and I stood by my abandoned ashpot, and Corvus stood very straight and said nothing at all now, which after all his talking was the loudest thing he could have done. The record came up. The station's true timestamp for Corvus's manifest was dated 11 days after the Kestrel had logged the salvage. Not before. After. He had filed his claim, seen the human ship's salvage log, and then forged a copy backdated to make it look as though the crate had been his all along. The unforgeable record, the one written into the bones of the station, the one no one had thought to check in perhaps 600 years, laid it bare in a single line of pale light. Corvus had lied in the kneeling court. I have adjudicated 1,000 cases, and I have never heard a silence like the one that fell then, because everyone in that hall understood at the same moment several things stacked on top of each other: that the human had not lied, that the human had knelt anyway rather than say a false word about her own mind, that her crew had knelt beside her out of love and not guilt, and that the man who had set the whole machine of our oldest and heaviest right in motion, the man who had asked for the full abasement with sorrow in his false face, he was the liar. He had used the court itself as a weapon. He had turned the most sacred thing we had into a knife and tried to put it to the throat of an innocent stranger. To a Dre, there is no worse crime. I told you at the start, a lie in the court is the deepest wound one person can do to another, because it poisons the trust that lets strangers live together at all. And Corvus had not merely lied. He had lied in order to make an innocent person perform our deepest rite of guilt. He had tried to make the law lie for him. Ordris Vane rose from the high seat. It took her a long time. She was so old. And when she was standing, bent over her permanent bow, she looked at Corvus with an expression I had never seen on a reader's face in 40 years, and I hope I never see again. "Take the ash," she said to me. I picked up the pot. "Not for her," Ordris Vane said. "You know for whom. And here is where I will tell you the truth about myself, because I have promised you the truth all through this telling, and I will not stop now at the part that does not flatter me. I wanted to mark him. In that moment I wanted it more than I have ever wanted anything. 40 years of drawing the gray line across the throats of people who had only lost, and now here at last was a throat that deserved it, a man who had truly lied, who had tried to weaponize our shame against a woman who did not even understand what our shame was, and I wanted to draw that line so hard the ash would never fade. I wanted the whole hall to watch him kneel a full turning of the clock. I wanted Reyes to stand over him while he did it. I wanted it. And I looked up, with the ash pot in my hand and the hunger for it in my chest, and I found Captain Reyes already looking at me. She had seen it in my face. Of course she had. She read faces for a living. You do, when you captain 6 people through the dark in a patched ship. She saw exactly what I wanted to do, and she saw exactly why, and she did the last thing she did that day that I have carried with me ever since. She shook her head, very slightly, just once. And she said quietly, only to me, the way she'd handed me back the pot, "Don't. If you mark him because he deserves it, you've just proven your law is about who deserves it, and you told the whole room it wasn't. You told them it's only supposed to make the guilty seen." She glanced at Corvus, who was finally, at last, afraid. "He's seen. Everyone in this room will remember his face. You don't need the ash for that. The ash was never what did it." I stood there. She was right. God's help me, she was right, and she had been right about our own law faster and more truly than any Dre who had ever administered it, because she came from outside it and could see its shape the way you can only see the shape of a thing you did not grow up inside of. The mark had never been what made the guilty seen. The witnessing was what did that. The eyes of the community turning toward the truth. The ash was just theater we had wrapped around the real thing, until we mistook the wrapping for the gift. I lowered the pot. "Corvus of the Outer Belts," I said, and my voice was steady now, steadier than it had been all day. "The station's true record finds you the false witness. You lied in the court. You attempted to make an innocent stranger perform the full abasement for a crime you yourself committed. This is known now. It is seen. Every person in this hall has seen it, and every person who was not here will hear of it, and you will carry that for the rest of your life across every dock in this dark, in every hall where the story is told." I paused. "That is your kneel. You will not perform it here on this stone for a single turning of the clock. You will perform it everywhere forever in the memory of everyone who watched you flinch from a record you swore was true. Now get off this station. The crate is theirs. It was always theirs. Go." He went. I will not pretend it was some grand exit. He was just a man who had been caught, walking fast through a crowd that would not touch him but would not look away from him either, out through the receiving hall and back to his ship, carrying a thing heavier than any ash, carrying the fact that a whole station had watched the truth come up out of the floor and turn him inside out. I have heard in the years since that the story followed him. I have heard it followed him a long way. Good. But I told you Corvus was not the real ending, and he is not. Because when he was gone and the hall was breathing again, Ordris Vane came down from the high seat. She came down the long steps slowly, bent over her bow, and she crossed the floor to where Captain Reyes stood among her crew, and the whole court watched the oldest reader on Ashkari Deep walk up to a human survey captain in a patched ship's jacket. And Ordris Vane, who had bent her neck 10,000 times in 600 years to administer a law she had never once questioned, stopped in front of Reyes. And she bared her own throat. I heard the sound go through the hall again, that collective breath, because a reader does not kneel. A reader does not bare the throat. The reader is the one who witnesses. That is the whole architecture of our world. But Ordris Vane stood there, bent and ancient, and she lifted her chin and offered her throat to a foreigner, and she said, loud enough for all of it to hear, "Your law came into our hall today, not the one written in our statutes, a different one. The one that says a person does not kneel alone, and that the shape of shame worn by the innocent out of love is not shame at all, and that the record beneath the record must be checked before any throat is bared. We did not have that law. We had grown too old to imagine it. You brought it through our door in a broken ship, and you knelt on our stone to keep from telling a lie about your own mind, and your people knelt beside you rather than let you be alone, and in the space of one morning you taught 600 years of readers what our own right was supposed to mean." Her old voice did not shake. "I am too old to change what I have already done 10,000 times, but I am not too old to be witnessed learning it. So I bare my throat to you, human, not because I lost. Because I was wrong, and you were the one who showed me, and I would rather be seen learning it from you than die never having knelt at all." And Captain Ada Reyes looked at this ancient bent creature offering her the throat, and I watched a human try to understand a gift she had no frame for, and I watched her get it. Not the way a Dre would get it, but her own way, which was maybe better. She did not tell Ordris Vane to stop. She understood that would take the gift away. She stepped forward instead, and she reached up. She had to reach up. The old reader was so tall, even bent, and she laid her hand very gently on the side of Ordris Vane's bared throat. Not the gray line, not the ash, just a hand. A human hand, warm, on the offered throat of an alien, the way you might steady someone who has knelt too long and needs help standing. "Where I come from," Reyes said, "when someone shows you their throat, you don't mark it, you cover it. You keep it safe, that's what it's for." She pressed her palm there a moment longer. "You weren't wrong for 600 years. You were wrong for one morning and then you weren't. That's the fastest I've ever seen anybody learn anything. Get up, please. You've got nothing to be marked for." And she helped the oldest reader on Ashkari Deep straighten up out of her bow, as much as that old neck would straighten, which was not much, but which was more than it had straightened in years. They changed the law after that. Not all at once, nothing changes all at once with the Dre. We are a slow people, we distrust anything fast. But it changed. Within the year, the statute of the full abasement was rewritten. No off-worlder can now be sentenced to a right their body was not built to bear. The shape of a Dre's mercy will not again be forced onto a form for which it is only torture. And the raw station record, the unforgettable one, written into the bones of the docks, must now be pulled and checked in open court before any finding of false witness can stand. We call that second change Reyes's rule, though she never asked for it, and I do not think she knows we named it after her. Somewhere out in the dark, a woman is captaining a patched ship with no idea that her name is now spoken in the oldest court in our part of the galaxy, every time someone reaches for the truth beneath the record. As for me, I told you it ended my career, and it did, in the sense that I never again sat at the reader's table with the ash pot by my hand. I could not. Once you have seen what the ash really is, a wrapping we mistook for the gift, a theater of a thing that was never the thing, you cannot pick it up again and pretend. I asked to be released from the readers. They released me. Ordris Vane signed the release herself, with her own bent hand, and she did not try to talk me out of it, which was its own kind of blessing. I stayed on Ashkari Deep. Someone has to keep the story, and I decided it would be me. I walk the gray corridors and I feel the hum in my teeth, and I stop, sometimes, at the pale worn stone where the guilty used to kneel alone, and I remember 6 people kneeling in a line because their captain would not kneel by herself, and I remember an ancient reader baring her throat to a foreigner, and I remember a human hand laid gently over that throat instead of a gray line of ash. People ask me, the young ones who come through now, why the stone is kept but not used. Why we left it there, polished pale by 600 years of throats, when we do not kneel the old kneel on it anymore. And I tell them the truth. I tell them we keep it so that no reader ever forgets what the law almost was, and what it took to teach us better. I tell them a woman came through our door in a broken ship, and knelt on that stone rather than tell one small lie to make her own suffering shorter, and that her crew knelt beside her, and that in doing it, they showed us the difference between a person who did wrong and a person who simply lost. A difference we had been unable to see for 600 years because we had never once had anyone brave enough, or foreign enough, or loving enough to show us. And then they always ask the same last question. They ask what happened to her, to Reyes, where did she go? And I have to tell them I do not know. She fixed her ship, took her crate that was always hers, and sailed back out into the dark to whatever a human survey captain sails toward, and she never came back, and I never learned her fate. 6 people in a patched vessel, gone into the black, carrying no idea that they had rewritten the oldest law of a species they met for a single morning. That is the part that stays with me most, I think. Not the drama of the record coming up, not Corvus walking out inside out, not even Ordris Vane barring her throat. What stays with me is that Reyes never knew. She did not do it to change our law. She did not do it to be remembered. She did it because there was one small lie she would not tell about her own mind, and because when her captain knelt, her crew would not let her kneel alone. That was all. That was the whole of it. And it was enough to reach 600 years down through the bones of a station built to keep judgment far from anything living, and teach the coldest court in the dark what mercy was actually for. I keep the ash pot on a shelf now. I never use it. Sometimes a young reader in training asks me why I keep a thing I never use, a thing from a rite we changed, and I tell them what Reyes told me, all those years ago, kneeling on the stone with her throat bared and her hands trembling from the effort of a shape her body was screaming not to take. You keep it, she said, for the ones who actually lie. And I do, but in all the years since, I have never once had to reach for it. Because it turns out that, when you make the truth beneath the record something anyone can ask to see, when you turn the eyes of the whole hall not toward the weaker party but toward the true one, the liars mostly stop coming. They cannot bear to be seen. That was always the only thing the ash was ever really for. She understood that before any of us did. I am Veshtol. I was a reader of the kneeling court for 40 years, and I drew the gray line 10,000 times, and I believed the whole time that I was administering mercy. And then a human woman knelt on my stone rather than tell a lie, and her frightened crew knelt beside her, and an ancient judge bared her throat, and I set the ashpot down and could not pick it up again. And that was the first honest day of my life, and every honest day since has been built on it. They say humanity conquers. They say humanity fights when it makes no sense to fight, makes promises to strangers and keeps them, walks into other people's laws and does not bend. And all of that is true, but that is not what I saw. What I saw was smaller and larger than conquest. What I saw was 6 people deciding that one of them would not kneel alone. That is the strongest thing I have ever witnessed, and I have witnessed 10,000 kneelings. I hope wherever she is, Someone kneels beside her when she needs it. She would never ask. That is exactly why someone should.